All right, we're back here with the Stover CT1, and what I'm going to be doing right now is putting this piston back in there. I've checked the rings and the oil slinger ring, and they all look like they're in pretty good shape. So I'm just spreading out the gaps, and then I'm going to lube this a little bit. Let's see, hang on, I got to grab the oil. I'm going to lube this section of the piston that has the rings to make sure that they're lubed sufficiently. Just want to make sure that when this piston gets in there before it's able to sling its own oil, it's lubed well. So I'm just going to smear some oil around it like that. I'll put a little oil in the cylinder as well. Just to make sure we got plenty of lube in here. All right, I think that's going to work. Now I have a oil ring compressor here that I'm going to put on here. Just to make sure. And then what we'll do is we'll slide this in. I'm going to put it in from this side since I've got the flywheel out. And I don't think there's an up or a down to this, so I'm going to, whoops. I've got to tighten this just a little. I don't want to get it too tight because I want it to slide once we get it in there, and I'll loosen it up if I have to. All right, so we're going to put this apparatus down in here and get it started into the cylinder. And maybe I have this thing too tight, perhaps. Or maybe not tight enough. Maybe that's the issue. Normally when you put the pistons in from the other side, you tap them down from the top. So I'm going to tighten this just a little bit. And then we'll be able to tap this into the cylinder, hopefully. Got to find my rubber mallet. All right, we got a rubber mallet here. and we pull the compressor off. We ought to be able to tap this in. You know what I just noticed is we're getting compression, and that's because the spark plug's still in. So let me I'll turn the camera off. I'll be right back. I'm gonna take the spark plug out. Okay, so I got took the spark plug out, and that should make this a lot easier. All right, so that's good. Now I'm gonna go ahead and push this cylinder in, push the rod and the piston in kind of as far as it'll go, because we're going to have to set the crank back in here with the flywheels. Oh, great. I just put my finger in all the oil in the oil vat down there. So we're going to have to set the crank in here and then pull the piston back out, assemble the bearings, the bolts, and so forth, as we get as we get the whole thing put back together. So I think the next step here is to lube up these bearings, and the thing I don't know about yet is whether I need to shim these surfaces here and here. I've got a whole series of shims, very thin ones and some much thicker ones. Some are made out of metal, some seem to be almost a fabric. So we'll get the shim set up, and I really didn't pay attention to the shim situation, where they came from exactly, because we're putting new bearings in, so I think it changes everything. So we'll just have to go play it by ear here. There's also a series of shims for the rod bearing connection as well. You can see these here, little copper. There's about 6 of those. So we've saved all those, and we'll use those as we need to when we put this back together. And again, I really don't know much about the torque and what it should feel like, so we're gonna just play it by ear and put this thing back together slowly and make sure we have a good fit with no slop in the bearings and smooth turning and so forth. And so once we get that, I think we'll be in good shape. I'm going to use some engine lube assembly here to lube these bearings to get this to get them pre-lubed, and then we will see if we can get the crank in here. I think the crank's going to be kind of hard to set in here because it's heavy with the flywheels on it. And I'd like not to take the flywheels off because they're kind of right where they need to be. Although I do need to adjust the flywheels to make sure that they're not... I've got to make sure that they're pushed in enough to keep these bearings flush with this piece of casting right here. All right. So the question is, do we really need to put the shims in here before we set the crank in here? That's really the question. So we're going to have to think about that. And again, when we put this back in, we're going to have to make sure we mark and set up the dimples on the gears here to make sure that we have those correct, because we got to get the timing lined up just perfectly, or else we're all in big trouble. So I'm just going to see if I can see that, yeah, the dimples haven't moved. They're right here in these teeth. So we got to get the tooth of the on the crankshaft to fit right in there with the dimple right in the right place. Everything else inside here looks real good. I recently changed the oil, and so the oil vat looks pretty clean. It's not black, it's kind of a greenish color. So I'm going to make some decisions here on the shims just to start with, and then we'll figure out how to put this crank on here. Again, it's real heavy. I'm not sure I can do it myself. I guess I can, but I can get some help if I need it. So I'm going to turn the camera off here, and I'll get back to you shortly. Okay, so I think we have everything here ready to set the crank back on. So I'm going to go get the flywheels and the crank assembly. I'm going to set it right here. I'm a little afraid my lamp's in the way. So this might be a little difficult to see. It's not too bad. And we're going to set it right in here, and then we're going to lift one side and adjust the teeth as needed. And see how it goes. Yep. All right, here we go. I've already messed up and moved one of the bearings. I moved both bearings. One of the spacers got kind of messed up. Yeah, my gears aren't where they need to be. So I'm going to lift this up and turn it. There we go. Okay. So I've got the gears lined up, and I've got everything set. My bearings came kind of loose, so we're going to see about that. And then we're going to start shimming and getting this thing put back together. And I guess the biggest thing is we got the dimple in the right place. So that's really good news. And we're pretty excited about that. Okay. Well, you can see what everything looks like. I'm gonna set this down here. And so right now, this gear right here is lined up with this other gear with the dimple on this gear in between the two dimples on that one. And so I didn't move this whole assembly, so it's exactly where it needs to be. And I've set this back on. So that should be good. I've got the bearing surfaces, the crankshaft surfaces are now seated in the bearings. They've been pre-lubed, and they look like they're set in there just like they ought to, although some of the bearings got a little messed up. I'm going to have to see if I can't get them turned a little bit. Let me just try. That's it right there. Just using a brass drift here so I don't dent anything or put any too much stress on stuff. Okay, so next I'm gonna put the lube on and put the top bearings on, and then I think we're gonna start worrying about shims and buttoning up those things. Question here is, when do we do the, maybe we ought to do this bearing first, the rod bearing first. That's what I'm thinking. So I'm going to get the bearings out for that, and we'll get going on the rod bearing first. All right, so I've got everything lined up. I've got one bearing in. I've got the rod. I pulled the rod back out some so that I could easily get to these two bolts. Now I'm a little worried about this because if you look at the scoring on this piece right here, you can see that these bearings have been spinning, it appears, for some time, and so that could mean that these pieces are a little too big. So maybe that just means I don't put all the shims back in. I'm not exactly sure what it means yet. But I've put 3 on the top, 3 on the bottom. I'm going to put this other bearing in here. And then I'm going to put the bearing cap on here. And I think the thing to do here is just tighten these up and kind of see how things go. Now, I had this other problem. When I opened this up, one of these was really loose, and maybe that's why the bearing spun. You can see these two castle nuts here. Let's see, yeah, there. This one's in real good shape. Look how tall the castles are. But look how short the castles are on this one. And in fact, if you look this way, you can see they're kind of hollowed out by probably slapping around with the cotter pin through there. So I'm not sure that when I tighten this, using this, that I can get the cotter pin to hold this nut, because I'm afraid it'll be up above the castle. So I found another one off of one of my Model A parts, and I think this one is in good shape. It seems to be the same thread, and exactly the same bolt, a little taller maybe. So I'm going to try to use this other bolt and see if that works. So we'll start off by putting the old one back on the bottom. And again, there's a hole through the bolt here, and that's where the cotter pin goes. So once you get this tight, you have to make sure that you've got space through the castle nut to get to the to get the cotter pin through there. So I'm going to sort of hand tighten that one, and then I'm going to lube this one a little because it's rusty. Let's see. Now, one thing I noticed is that the cotter pin hole is a lot further out on the end of this than that one is, and so maybe that was the problem in the first place. Maybe that's why this thing was boogered up. You know, that doesn't go on there very well, and the threads on this are pretty bad. So I'm going to use the old nut for now and just see how bad this will be. And again, I have no idea what the torques ought to be in this situation here. Okay, and the bearings are not moving. which is a really good sign. So let me go get the right tools to tighten these up, and maybe I'll get a torque wrench and we'll kind of play with the torques. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and torque these up to 20 pounds. Actually, I'm going to start at 15, I think. Okay, so we'll go to 15, just because I have no idea what it should be. So let's see how this goes. That seems awfully tight. See, that's just totally locked up. It doesn't move at all. All right. Well, what we do know is that with this nut, the hole is outside of it, so the castle nut's not going to hold this thing on. It's going to come loose over time. And we also know that the torque's got to be quite a bit less. And I've got all the shims in there already. So this doesn't move at all. Okay, I got some work to do on torques. All right, so this is the 1930s Stover CT1. I started this project a couple months ago and I've been kind of off of it for a while, but I'd like to get it back and get it going. There's some work to be done on the magneto snap mechanism, but right now what I've been working on is I put new bearings in the new rod bearings in here, and then also crankshaft bearings in both of these. The other bearings were broken and severely worn and loose and cracked, and they were a real mess. So I've been working to get these new bearings in, and the problem is these bearings are, you know, slightly bigger than the old ones, and so I'm having to create some new shims. So the shims under here, they look like this. And some of them are made out of like gasket material, others are made out of metal, could be copper or aluminum, even some steel. And so I've been trying to come up with various types of material in order to build up some of these shims, and like this is one that I took out of a piece of deck bracket, and I had to drill the hole in the middle there. But these, I've been working on it to build up the shims so that I can tighten these bolts without compressing the bearing so much that it won't spin. So I'm trying to keep the flywheels moving and not too tight. So it's just a matter of getting the right amount of shim in there. It's hard to measure how much you need. I think it seems better to just kind of a trial and error. So I made up a number of shims, and I thought I had it, tightened these up, and these flywheels don't move. So I'm going to be loosening these today and putting in a couple more of these shims and see if we can't get this squared away. Once I get these bearings installed and lubricated and ready to go, then I'm going to button all this up, have new gaskets and oil retainer seals and different things, and then I'll move to the magneto side of this and solve this engine's startability once and for all. So I'm gonna take these off, and I'll come back and we'll take a look at the inside and see what we need to do with the shims. Alright, I got these caps off so you can see there's some shims already in there. So here you can see there's a pretty thick one. Actually, there's two pretty thick ones, and then a gasket style on top of that, and that's just not enough. So we just need to make sure we get I think the two sides have to be pretty even. So I'm going to pull the bearing off, pull these out, and just see what we've got here. Yeah, there was hardly any on the other side. So what I'm going to do is add one that I've made, this one, and add it to the other side there, so that we've got it built up about the same on both sides. Kind of the weird thing about these shims is they seem to, you can see the bottom bearing right here. Right there you can see it there, and these shims actually go over that, but they don't touch the armature or the crank. So it's important to get these lined up just right. And I'm going to put the bearing piece on here, and then we'll put the cap back on and see if that made the difference. And we'll do the same thing on the other side and just keep building this up until we think we've got it right. Yeah, so I could stand to add a large, thicker bearing shim on both sides of this. So let me pull this one out. Let's see if we can't get these situated. A little metal piece on here. Here we go. The other problem I sort of am dealing with is I've got some play back and forth. You can see how much that play is, and I think what I got to do is bring this flywheel in slightly so that it doesn't slide like that any longer. It looks like about 1/8 of an inch. So that's another issue I'm going to have to deal with here shortly. So I'm going to go tighten these up, and then we'll see if we can spin our flywheels once we tighten these up. Okay, it looks to me like we've solved the bearing issue. I've put in all the shims that I have for the bearings here on the crankshaft, and I've already tightened this one up, and I'll have to check that. I got to put some cotter pins in there, but you can see that I torqued these to 20 pounds, and I can still turn the wheel pretty freely. So I feel pretty good about that. I've lubed it up a little bit, and once it starts slinging oil inside here, it'll lube up even more. But I've filled these little cups here with oil, and I think we're going to be in good shape here. So I'm going to go with that, and we'll start working on the magneto side of this, and hopefully get this thing where we can start it anytime we want to. And again, the issue I had before, I was able to start it, and before I realized the bearings were shot, I was able to start it, but the snapping mechanism, there's 3 or 4 adjustments to that, and I just couldn't keep that adjusted. It would run for a while, and then I would turn it off and try to start it again, and it wouldn't give a spark. So you fiddled with some adjustments, and then suddenly it starts sparking again. When you see the spark in the spark indicator wire that I put in between the spark plug and the magneto, then I knew it would start every single time. But if you don't see the spark, it won't start. So I'm trying to make the spark reliable every time, and I think it has to do with just the snapping mechanism itself. There's some worn parts there. Maybe the springs are worn out and need to be replaced, so I'll be looking at that. So I'm going to button up this. I'm going to put all new felt washer or felt material in here to keep it from leaking oil anywhere, and put it all back together. I changed the oil on this not too long ago, so I'm just going to leave the oil the way it is. I put the piston back in, and again, there's some gaskets and things all along here that I've ordered and have, and I'll put those in and put this covering back on. So that's where we are with the CT1 stover, and the next part of this will be to get the adjustments just right on the snapping mechanism for the Wyco magneto, and that should do it.